Harriet Jacobs writes in the preface to her 1861 slave narrative, "Be assured this narrative is no fiction." Despite the author's desperate desire to be believed, her bold claim of veracity, and a dozen enthusiastic reviews and notices in the abolitionist press, the authorship of Harriet Jacobs' slave narrative would remain for the next 120 years a matter of doubt and dispute. Indeed, the fate of Jacobs' text, its loss and rediscovery, makes it an emblem of the history of the black woman's literary tradition. One of the most curious aspects of African people's enslavement in this country is that he and she wrote about the severity of their own confinement. In the long and terrible history of human bondage, it was only the black slaves in the United States who, once secure and free in the North, created a genre of literature that at once testified against their captors and bore witness to the urge of every black slave to be free and literate. While hundreds of male ex-slaves were encouraged to tell their tales, few women were able to narrate or publish their own indictments of the twin brothers of oppression, slavery and sexism. Indeed, William Andrews, an expert on Afro-American slave narratives, concludes that by 1866, only 4 black women had published their stories. As if racism and slavery had not been harsh enough, interracial sexism stifled even the freed black woman's voice. Of these female slave narratives, Harriet Jacobs' Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself, is the crowning achievement. Manifesting a command of rhetorical devices and narrative strategies rivaled only by that of Frederick Douglass, Jacobs' autobiography is one of the major works of Afro-American literature. Despite its great distinction as a remarkably well-written narrative and as a testament to the human will to survive, Jacobs' narrative has only recently been authenticated as written by herself, as her subtitle claims. Published under the pseudonym Linda Brent, edited by the well-known anti-slavery writer Lydia Maria Child, and constructed around an astonishing plot in which Jacobs remains concealed from her master for 7 years in a garret in her grandmother's home. Jacobs' narrative was long thought to be either a novel, assuming the shape of a slave narrative, as was Maddie Griffith's Autobiography of a Female Slave, 1857, or else a ghost-written autobiography that strained credulity. The classic statement of the fraudulence of Jacobs' work is that written by John W. Blassingame in The Slave Community, 1972. In spite of Lydia Maria Child's insistence that she had only revised the manuscript of Harriet Jacobs, mainly for purposes of condensation and orderly arrangement, the work is not credible. In the first place, the book is too orderly. Too many of the major characters meet providentially after years of separation. Then too, the story is too melodramatic. Miscegenation and cruelty, outraged virtue, unrequited love, and planter licentiousness appear on practically every page. The virtuous Harriet sympathizes with her wretched mistress, who has to look on all of the mulattoes fathered by her husband. She refuses to bow to the lascivious demands of her master, bears 2 children for another white man, and then runs away and hides in a garret in her grandmother's cabin for 7 years until she is able to escape to New York. In the meantime, her white lover has acknowledged his paternity of her children, purchased their freedom, and been elected to Congress. In the end, all live happily ever after. Despite the fact that an 1861 reviewer writing in the Anti-Slavery Advocate claimed an extended acquaintance with the author and her manuscript, and vouched with great confidence for the authenticity of her tale, it was not until 1981 that a scholar, Jean Fagan Yellen, demonstrated conclusively that Jacobs indeed wrote the narrative of her bondage and freedom. Few instances of scholarly inquiry have been more important to Afro-American studies than has Ms. Yellen's. The moving tale of her verification of Jacobs' authorship, including the discovery of a cache of her letters, several anonymous publications, traveling to North Carolina to discover the historical identities of her cast of characters, and even finding a gold-toned album in print of Jacobs herself, makes this edition of Incidents one of the most important documents in the Black woman's literary tradition, and Ms. Yellen's quest one of the most dramatic. Mr. Blassingame, by the way, was one of the first scholars to acknowledge the success of Ms. Yellen's work. Jacobs' narrative is a bold and gripping fusion of two major literary forms. She borrowed from the popular sentimental novel on one hand and the slave narrative genre on the other. Her tale gains its importance from the fact that she charts, in great and painful detail, the sexual exploitation that daily haunted her life, and the life of every other black female slave. In the character of the unrelentingly evil Dr. Flint, and in the hard choices that his vulgar pursuit forces Jacobs to make, she graphically renders the sexual aspect of economic exploitation in a manner unimaginable before. Whereas the black male slave narrator's account of sexual brutality remains suggestive, if gruesome, Jacobs, enlarging upon the precedent created by Mary Prince, the first black woman to publish an autobiography, charts in vivid detail precisely how the shape of her life and the choices she makes are defined by her reduction to a sexual object, an object to be raped, bred, or abused. To escape the repulsive advances of Dr. Flint, she becomes the lover of a white man called Sands, with whom she bears two children, whom Sands promises to free. Banished by an outraged Flint to another plantation and taunted by the threat of the permanent loss of freedom for her children, Jacobs escapes and hides in a garret in her grandmother's home, 3 feet high, 9 feet long, and 7 feet wide, for 7 years. Jacobs even writes letters in her garret, then has these mailed to Flint from Boston and New York. Sands does purchase, then seemingly liberate his children, and Jacobs and the children eventually escape to the north, where more subtle modes of oppression await. Jacobs revises the structure of the genre as practiced by its two great exemplars, Oluda Equiano, who published a popular autobiography in 1789, and Frederick Douglass by framing her story with descriptions of the inherent strength and nobility of her family, and especially that of her maternal grandmother, in whom she had a great treasure. In so doing, she depicts one of the earliest examples of female bonding in the black literary tradition, and she also appeals directly to a female readership, including whites, by selecting as one of her epigraphs Isaiah 32:9. Rise up, ye women that are at ease, hear my voice, ye careless daughters. This act, what feminists would call gendering, represents a major break from the male tradition she inherited. In the final paragraph of the narrative, Jacobs reflects upon the pains of her enslavement, finding comfort only in one set of memories. It has been painful to me in many ways to recall the dreary years I passed in bondage. I would gladly forget them if I could, yet the retrospection is not altogether without solace, for with those gloomy recollections come tender memories of my good old grandmother, like light, fleecy clouds floating over a dark and troubled sea. In this way, Jacob stresses not only the importance of her grandmother in her own life, but also the crucial centrality of female bonding in the life of the slave woman. This declaration, along with the fact that Jacobs here has remodeled the forms of the black slave narrative in the white female sentimental novel to create a new literary form, a narrative at once black and female, underscores the significance of incidents in the life of a slave girl, both to the Afro-American and the black woman's literary traditions. As Ms. Yellen concludes, in and through her creation of Linda Brent, who yokes her success story as a heroic slave mother to her confession as a woman who mourns that she is not a storybook heroine, Jacobs articulates her struggle to assert her womanhood and projects a new kind of female hero. Ms. Yellen's superbly researched edition ensures that Harriet Jacobs will never be lost again. She refused to remain a fiction. I am sitting under the old roof 12 feet from the spot where I suffered all the crushing weight of slavery. It was that line found in a letter from Harriet Jacobs in the Smith College archives that provided the crucial clue in Jean Fagan Yellen's 6-year search for the truth about Jacobs' life. Sent from Edenton, North Carolina, the letter gave Ms. Yellen a community on which to focus her detective work, and real people to match the pseudonymous ones in incidents in the life of a slave girl. Harriet Jacobs was an amazing woman, Jean Yellen said in a telephone interview from her office at Pace University. Just look at that portrait of her in the front of the book. There she is, in her 80s, and despite all the terrible things that had happened to her, she's still smiling. Looking for the portrait proved almost as difficult as salvaging Jacobs' reputation. Ms. Yellen tapped many resources without success. Reluctantly, she chose for the frontispiece the newspaper ad in which Jacobs' owner sought her recapture. I knew it wasn't right, though, Ms. Yellen recalled, because that would have been allowing her master to define her. Lecturing at a convention in California, Ms. Yellen mentioned her dilemma. Afterward, a colleague asked if she'd contacted a certain family in New England. A few days later, the only known photograph of Harriet Jacobs was in Ms. Yellen's hands. All these years, the portrait had been hanging in the family's parlor.